So the maladaptive adult is the part of you that has logic because now we're grown up. Like our brain is developed, our frontal lobe is developed. It knows what's happening. It very often sees the problem and can even name it, but it doesn't have the resources or the coping skills of a healthy, conscious adult. Instead, it's still pulling from the child and the teenager's toolbox. That's why we can think one thing or think and feel something and end up doing something completely different. Welcome to Grow with Robin Breckenridge, a podcast about stepping into the most fully expressed, aligned, and conscious version of yourself. Here, we dive into the real work of personal growth, establishing boundaries, understanding your patterns, building self-trust, healing emotional wounds, and creating relationships that feel safe, authentic, and fulfilling. I'm Robin, a life and relationship coach, and in each episode, we'll explore the tools, insights, and conversations that will help you not just improve your life and relationships, but truly transform them. You don't have to just go through it. Let's grow through it. And let's do it together. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. If I have not said this in a minute, I am so grateful you're here. I know as someone who has a very full life, busy schedule like most of us do, that even finding time to listen to a podcast or let alone listen to one that builds on itself is a choice, and sometimes an intentional choice to put that in your schedule. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm really grateful that you're here. And my deepest hope and dream is that you get something out of this podcast and hopefully something out of every single episode that we record on this podcast. So before we dive in, I want to just pause and highlight last week's episode with Josh Radner. If you haven't listened yet, I highly encourage you to. It was such an honest, powerful conversation. And I've heard from so many listeners mentioning how much they enjoyed it, how it resonated. And it was honestly just such a fun conversation with me. Josh is so special to me. Also, Josh is insanely intelligent, a very, very deep thinker and feeler, and a very emotionally intelligent person. And if you listen to the episode, he throws out a lot of quotes and a lot of things. And that's one thing that I know about Josh is he retains a lot of what he reads and hears. And so it's always just a gift to be able to have like that depth in a conversation. Because I know as a deep feeler myself and somewhat of a deep thinker, I think, sometimes we just feel a little bit like, yet again, another surface conversation. Definitely not in this podcast. I mean, everything we're talking about is deep, but it's just really neat. I mean, sometimes the guests that I have on the podcast, they're seeing me for specific reasons, and we don't just get to kind of shoot the shit, for lack of a better term. So it was just a really amazing opportunity for me to just be able to kind of freeform talk to Josh. And I thought there were so many things in that podcast that were noteworthy of putting down in your notes or books or things to check out that he mentioned. And I think that it was just a beautiful episode. So I hope that you guys can check it out. Today, we are continuing our series on the parts of self. And this week, we're talking about a part that most of you probably are familiar with, but have never necessarily named it. But it tends to be the part that we get pretty frustrated with. And this part I call your maladaptive adult. Now, I want you to keep in mind that, there's a lot of work in emotional growth and personal development and mental health that is very similar in the way that people teach it. We just might use different terminology. So I just want to identify that I know that I'm not the only person doing this work. And if there is work that you've already learned or resonates with you and you want to use a different term, by all means, go ahead. Like the last thing I want to do is make this like vocab heavy or that we have to worry about what we call it whatever aligns with you. But what made sense to me was calling it your maladaptive adult. So before I explain, the context behind that, I'd like to define two words that I think it's a great kind of core place to start. And those words are adaptive and maladaptive. So when we're children, we have to adapt to our environment. We don't get to choose our family system, our caregivers, their capacity, their availability, their level of trauma, or whether or not they've worked it out, or the circumstances that we find ourselves in as a child. So we find ways to manage our feelings and survive inside of whatever we were given. And by survive, I don't just mean physically survive. I mean emotionally and relationally as well. Because like I mentioned last week in my conversation with Josh, we need connection as much as we need air, water, food, and shelter to be able to survive as a child. Because that is the time of our life where we are truly dependent and powerless in this world. So when the choice, and this is what we talked about with Josh brought this great concept up, that when we're young and we have a choice between expressing ourselves in an authentic way or staying in connection with the people in our life, a child is always going to choose connection because it is a basic need. So as Josh pointed out, we will sacrifice what we actually need in order to preserve the bond or the connection because our survival depends on it. So of course, like I've mentioned a million times, not everybody's story is the same for all of the listeners. Some people might not have had physical needs met along with their emotional and relational needs not being met. Some of us had our physical needs met, but maybe there was emotional neglect going on in our life, that like our emotions weren't validated, that our emotional needs weren't considered. So back then, we would rely on our early strategies. So that might be people pleasing, shutting down, hiding, controlling, achieving. All of those were technically adaptive. They helped us survive. They worked. They helped us survive both emotionally and relationally. But when those same strategies carry into adulthood, they often become maladaptive. They no longer help us. They keep us stuck. They block us from living an aligned and authentic life. And they interrupt the very thing we need most as adults. And this kind of goes for any part of development as a human being. We need safe and genuine connections. We need to feel like we are seen, heard, matter. And here's another piece. These patterns kind of naturally go into becoming maladaptive because somewhere along our development, we had to abandon ourselves to stay in relationship or connection with other people. That's going back to the do you choose authenticity or the connection you're in? If we choose the connection and we neglect the authenticity, we are neglecting our relationship with ourselves. We become disconnected from ourselves. So it's like when I have conversations kind of early on in the work about integrity or what feels true for you. And I know for my own journey, it was true. Like the word integrity, I think I really had to look up like in the Webster's dictionary a few times because I was like, what is this thing exactly? And I think integrity is who you are. It's your values. And there was a time in my life where I didn't really know who I was. I didn't really know my core values. So we can get to this maladaptive state kind of naturally because we are already so disconnected from ourselves. It's like self-neglect and self-abandonment is happening in a very unconscious way. So along the way, we stopped treating ourselves with kindness, consideration, and emotional attunement. Instead of turning inward with compassion, we default to our old survival behaviors. And when we do that, our responses to our own pain aren't thoughtful or supportive or emotionally attuned. They're reactive, they're automatic, and often they are unconscious. So the maladaptive adult isn't just using outdated coping strategies. It's also showing us how far we've drifted from the ability to be in relationship with ourselves in a caring and attuned way. And this is where the maladaptive adult comes in. So the maladaptive adult is the part of you that has logic because now we're grown up. Like our brain is developed, our frontal lobe is developed. It knows what's happening. It very often sees the problem and can even name it, but it doesn't have the resources or the coping skills of a healthy, conscious adult. Instead, it's still pulling from the child and the teenager's toolbox. That's why we can think one thing or think and feel something and end up doing something completely different. So an example of that could be, texting that person isn't healthy. They're not good for you, but you still do it. Saying yes will burn you out, but you can't seem to stop yourself. Numbing isn't going to solve it. It's only going to make things worse, but it feels like the only option in the moment. And this creates inner conflict. Logically, you know better. Emotionally, you feel flooded. Behaviorally, you fall into old coping strategies. And that misalignment between thinking, feeling, and doing can feel like you're powerless against your own choices, behavior, and actions. The maladaptive adult isn't an aligned part of you, not because it doesn't care. It's because it's under-resourced. It only has the same coping skills you had as a child or a teenager. Maybe those coping skills are avoidance, people-pleasing, controlling, numbing, hiding, overperforming. I already gave you guys a list of just some of them, but the list goes on and on. Those coping skills, they worked back then. Maybe they immediately got you out of conflict or got you the attention or approval that you needed. But now they don't work the same. Even though they might momentarily get you out of something, they are prohibiting you from creating more connection in your life, from yourself and other people. Ultimately, that's the main goal. We all want to be in connection with ourselves and other people. And this is why this particular part of self feels so frustrating. If I had $1, and I know I say this a lot on this podcast, but if I had $1 for every time somebody came to me so frustrated with themselves, like, I knew I shouldn't have done it. I did it anyways. It's all my fault. This is what I get. This is what I deserve. And every time I let them know, oh, right, like we've got a little bit of an unrealistic expectation here. Feelings are not logical. So when we can't apply logic to something, it usually means that we were overcome or overwhelmed by a challenging feeling. And we relied on our old coping mechanisms to help us manage and tolerate that particular feeling. So it is not that you have a lack of logic or intellect. And that's what can get hard. Like, God, I'm smarter than that. Or I've been doing this work with Robin or a therapist, or I read this book. I know this information. I didn't access it. It's not a lack of logic or intellect. It's a lack of capacity and tools and being able to connect with a resourced part of self. So that sets us up. Okay, well, what now, Robin, right? Because I like to come in here every week and give you guys some actionable steps, not just more talk about these concepts that, probably most of us have heard of or had some level of exposure to. So I'm going to keep this consistent, and we're going to do the same thing for each part of self. And per usual, you can go in the show notes underneath the podcast, and you can download the little worksheet that I filled out for you or created for you guys on the maladaptive adult. And this is where we're going to do something about it. So we're going to do the same thing we did for the inner child and the inner teenager. I want you to think of one challenging feeling that you still feel or often experience as an adult. So some examples of that might be loneliness, rejection, shame, guilt, overwhelm. Write it down. You can write it down in your own notes. You can download the attachment below, print it out, put it in your own little binder here, do whatever you want with it. But let's write down one challenging feeling that you still feel as an adult. Now I want you to notice, what action do you usually take when you notice that feeling come up? So do you overcommit? Do you numb? Do you lash out? Do you shut down? Do you distract yourself and dissociate? Finally, I want you to, if it's available to you, connect it to a pattern. Now, I've already linked a page in our episode for the inner child where it had a whole list of like what could be some examples of patterns that you might see in your life or somewhere throughout your life. So let's connect it with a pattern. Maybe it's controlling, numbing, people pleasing, whatever it is. Let's high level it with a pattern that you think might be aligned with the action that you just put down. And then I want you to start getting curious, because a couple takeaways from this whole entire podcast. If you want to change your life or change your behavior, do it differently. Get curious, get curious, get curious. So you're going to hear me say that a million times. So let's get curious. Where else in your life have you felt this way and responded in the same way? Or where is it currently happening? Does it trace back to a childhood strategy, a teenage coping mechanism? That's it. One feeling, one action, one pattern. Again, this is not about fixing it right now. It's about noticing and building awareness. Because once you can name it, you've already begun shifting out of that default automatic pilot. And I promise we're going to put all of this together. So this is where I want to pause and just reinforce something that I just said a few minutes ago. Feelings are not logical. Your feelings, they're not flaws. They are not things that we need to get out of as fast as humanly possible. They are communication. They are your nervous system's way of signaling a need. Maybe it's a need for safety, protection, connection, soothing, belonging. When the maladaptive adult shows up, it's usually trying to meet that need as quickly as possible, often through escape. Scrolling, numbing, overworking, drinking, people pleasing. One of my personal favorites, dissociation. These behaviors are maladaptive, not bad. Listen, they served you. They worked at some point. And like when I think about back to some of my own maladaptive coping mechanisms, gosh, I'm grateful. I was very frustrated in the beginning, but I'm so grateful now because it really did get me by. I'm also really grateful that I was able to align with work that illuminated them, because once they were illuminated and I could see them, then I could choose how I want to interact with them. So remember, these behaviors are maladaptive, but they are still meeting the need. We will meet our needs, albeit maladaptively. So they work, just not in the way that moves you towards alignment and authentic connection and sustainability. Like I have said this a million times in this work. I am not like a goody two shoes, like do it right type of gal, if there were some hacks to this work, like, I don't know, if avoidance worked, if dissociation worked, like I would teach it. I'd be like, here's a hack. Shut it down. Keep going. It'll never come back. It's just not realistic. It's not true. So when you have a feeling that's hard, challenging, historically terrifying for you, the invitation is not to shame yourself for being there, but to ask, what is this feeling communicating to me? What need is it pointing to? Is there another way I can meet that need without abandoning myself or my values? Now, you're in the right place. I've figured out how to teach this in a way that is highly impactful. So keep listening to this podcast, because in the next few episodes, handful of episodes, I'm going to teach you how to do that very thing. Like, what do feelings mean from a communication perspective? We're going to go over that. We're going to continue to work on getting curious. But right now, I want you to just start a series of questioning that leans more towards getting curious with yourself than judgmental. Awareness doesn't magically change the behavior, but it does create space. And in that space is the possibility to choose something new. But if we don't see things, how can we choose it? How can we interact? So to give you guys an example, because sometimes I feel like the maladaptive part can be a little bit hard to suss out. And if anybody has children around you or in the car, and I know I had an amazing guest, Shilpa Shah, on, and I told her I was going to limit my curse words on the podcast because I have a very special friend, her son, that likes to listen to the podcast sometimes and hear his auntie Robin talk. But if anybody's around, earmuffs or pause it and save it for later, because this is important and I think it's pretty relatable. I think that our maladaptive adult part of us is the part of us that hits the fuck it button. And what that means, and this is kind of the differentiation between the other parts of self, is that your maladaptive adult part, it has the logic. It knows, like, oh, I shouldn't call this guy, or like, I shouldn't eat this whole bag of donuts, or I shouldn't say yes to this other project at work because I'm already burned out. But because we don't have other more healthy coping mechanisms like boundaries, the ability to say no, to have a hard conversation, to ask what we need, then we hit the fuck it button and we go, I know I shouldn't do this, but fuck it. So this tends to be the part of us that knows we shouldn't do something, or knows that it's not good for us or not healthy, or that there is a more negative consequence to follow it. But we hit the fuck it button because we need some way to either get out of the pain, manage the emotion that we're in, and we need to get out of it fast. So in my own journey of getting to know myself, and, I've been in this journey for, a while, over a decade. So I don't want anybody to think this is where they should be. But I now know that my inner child tends to be more of the kind of avoidant part of me. It houses a lot more of my deeper, darker, challenging feelings. My inner teenager tends to be the more hyper vigilant part of me, meaning that, like, she did her job. She was like, hey, that little girl is not going to feel depressed. She's not going to feel not good enough. She's not going to feel dumb, stupid, less than, in the one down. So she kind of got grandiose, and also just started fighting for everything. And so that part of me, was really good at, like, making a lot of fun and kind of escaping from my current reality or whatever was challenging me at the time. So that part tends to be a little bit more of the hypervigilant part. My maladaptive adult is the part of me that gets really stuck because I kind of have these two parts that are a little bit opposing in the way that they manage things. So I know we haven't talked about attachment styles just yet, but it really kind of plays into that like you can have different parts of self that have different attachment styles. Like you could have a more avoidant inner child, a more anxious teenager, and then that combination can create a more ambivalent adult where you're really doing both. You're kind of shifting in times of activation to more anxious responses, more avoidant responses, and ultimately in more of like a stuck or freeze type of energy. So I know that my maladaptive adult part of me is the part that can get really stuck in things that no longer serve me. And I don't know if I've ever told this. I probably have on this podcast at some point. But I know that there was a time in my life where I really felt activated and I felt really stuck and I felt like I have no idea what to do. And I just happened to be like outside, I think like with my dog, like letting my dog out. I don't know why I remember exactly where I was in that moment. And I remember having this epiphany of like, Robin, people pay you like really good money to give them advice. So that would mean you got some tools on board, like you have some solution. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Okay. Like I have that in-house. I just have to be able to find it in this moment for me. Because what makes this work really hard, and honestly, one of the main reasons that I use exercises in the work and I write things down is because it's very easy to get so activated, especially depending on your trauma, in parts of self. And it's what I call blacking out in your inner teen, blacking out in your teenager. And I distinctly remember one time like writing all this stuff down, calling up a trusted friend, being very, very flooded or blacked out in my inner child. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And she goes, wait, you wrote all that stuff down, like all these actions you could do. Like, can you go get that binder or that piece of paper? And so I went and I got it out and it literally said like, go for a walk when I feel this particular feeling, or, call a friend. It was like very simple things that I could do versus like these self-destructive things that were my default. And so I remember being like, oh, okay, I guess I could take a walk. Now, you guys, from a logical perspective, I know I can take a walk. I know that I have like, I don't know, 1,000 off the top of my head type of tools that I could use, but my inner child doesn't. And at that moment, I was flooded with her and her coping mechanisms and her level of consciousness at that time. And so it was honestly a lifesaver that I had written down what I could do to manage those feelings or that particular feeling I was in a way that didn't harm me and other people. That's why I'm such a huge fan of writing things down. It's why I send an email after every session in case anybody ever wants to look back on certain things that we talked about, because sometimes the logical part of us, the part that holds the tools and the good information, is a little bit harder to access or find. So when we write it down, it's like a jolt back into our logical brain that goes, oh yeah, right. I have tools. There's something that I can do about this. So again, I have to do this in a scaffolded way. So otherwise I would literally do like 5-hour episodes and nobody would listen and we would get nowhere and I would flood you guys with information. I will get to what I call your conscious adult. How do we create different repairs and tools that we can write down and have access to when these parts of self come up? Because one other thing I want to mention, and I distinctly remember one story working with a client, and she called me and she said, I want my teenager to stop liking bad boys. And I was like, oh, we can't do that. Like, your inner teenager only has and only ever will have the level of consciousness she had at the time. So we can't convince our teenage self to stop liking bad boys or to stop going to the same coping mechanisms to manage our feelings. We have to develop a part of self that is trustworthy enough, that has tools, that has that emotional attunement, that cares and loves the parts of ourself that can show up and guide that part of self. So that is where in the car analogy, we can go like, hey, teenager, I got this. You can take your hands off the wheel. I'm going to choose the type of partners that we're going to date from here on out. I mean, your input is considered, right? Like we want to listen to parts of self. But again, that word choice or agency comes in, that like once we have an awareness that there is a younger part of us that does not have the consciousness and maturity on board, when they trust us enough, they go, all right, you got this. Get behind the wheel. I just want to be a teenager and have a nice time. So in our next episode, we are going to start to map out what I call your conscious adult or your secure adult self. You already have one. All of us have it. We show up in one of these 4 ways at any given time, but it's probably not the most practiced part of us. And that is the part that this work addresses. It says, hey, repetition is the mother of learning, and we have to keep showing up and building new neural pathways through repetition in our behavior and using certain tools, and then things start to change. So for now, just like in the last few episodes talking about these parts of self, I just want you to build an awareness around this part of you that has logic, that kind of knows what's up, but can't seem to shift their behavior. That is your maladaptive adult. So as we close, I just want to remind you that the maladaptive adult is not proof that you are messed up beyond measure, behind, failing. It's proof that you learned how to survive. Yes, it's frustrating to know better and still fall into the same old coping behaviors, but now you can see the loop for what it is. And seeing it clearly is already a step towards shifting it. So thank you so much for being here with me today. Thank you again to Josh for last week's incredible episode. Again, if you haven't listened yet, I hope you will. Okay, earlier in the episode, I said that next week we were doing the conscious adult, and I was incorrect. So we are going to take a little pause before that because I do want to address some of the patterning, and I want to take a quick pause, and that's what we're going to do in next week's episode to build an awareness around seeing these parts of self either through the challenging behaviors or the actions, and just getting a little bit more well acquainted to these parts. And then I'm going to introduce your conscious adult self. So next week, we're going to talk about looking at some of the high level patterns that we're seeing from those little activities we did in every episode. What were you feeling? What challenging feelings did you have? What actions did you take? And what pattern could we associate that with? So stepping back into those bigger loops or patterns in your life and then connecting them to your inner child and your inner teen. Until then, this week, my invitation, just look for that part of you that hits that button, that knows, this might be self-abandonment. I know this isn't in my best interest, but I keep doing it anyways. One feeling, one action, one pattern at a time. That is enough for now. So thank you for being here. I can't wait to keep going forward. I mean, I swear every week I'm like, add another topic to my list for this podcast. So I'm going to be here for a while. We're going to be talking about lots of things. So thanks again. Let's look for your maladaptive adult this week. We're moving towards understanding some of these patterns and being able to interrupt them and disrupt them. We're going to bring in that higher, healthier part. And then we're going to get into reparenting, which is going to be so fun. So from here on out, after next week's episode, we're kind of going to shift the focus to looking forward versus looking behind us. So I hope that you have a great Wednesday. I will see you next week, and take care until then. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for being here and for doing this work. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Come connect with me over on TikTok at Robin Breckenridge or Instagram at Coach with Robin, where I share even more insights, tools, and conversations around boundaries, self-trust, relational healing, and so much more. And just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational and personal growth purposes only. The insights and tools I share are based on my experience as a life and relationship coach and are meant for general guidance. Each person's story is unique, and the nuances of individual experiences can't always be addressed in this format. What's shared here may not be applicable to every situation, especially those involving abuse, oppression, severe mental illness, or systematic harm. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please seek support from a qualified mental health professional or emergency resources. Thank you for listening and for showing up for yourself in this way. Take care, and I'll see you next time.